Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Genshin Impact Chronicle. If you remember from our previous 2 episodes, we just finished talking about Old Mondstadt and the aristocratic era. If you remember, we briefly mentioned Barbatos in these episodes, but haven't really delved deep into who he is or even his backstory. That's what today's episode is all about, so buckle up and get ready for an adventure. We'll also be talking about Dvalin and Durin, 2 dragons who are deeply connected to Barbatos. So let's dive right in. We all know that Barbatos is the current Anemo Archon of the 7. His current public identity is Venti the Bard. He's a fun-loving, cat-adverse, and alcohol-loving bard who wanders the streets of Mondstadt, and sometimes other regions too. But how did Barbatos come about choosing a bard for his identity? This all started way back during the reign of Decarabian. Back then, Barbatos was just a wind spirit and didn't even have a form yet. He became friends with a bard in the windy prison of Old Mondstadt. We don't know what this bard's name was, so he is known as the Nameless Bard. By the time the rebellion rose up to remove Decarabian from power, Barbatos grew in power and was now able to take the form of a small wisp. He fought bravely alongside the Nameless Bard and others in the rebellion, and were finally victorious in removing Decarabian from power. Unfortunately, the Nameless Bard, who had become friends with Barbatos at this point, perished in battle. After the rebellion, when Barbatos finally ascended to become the Anemo Archon, his very first action was to take on the form of the Nameless Bard as a way to remember him. So what happened next? Barbatos was now the Anemo Archon, and it was his job and duty to rule over and take care of his people. He had to do a bit of redecorating of Mondstadt's terrain, just chopping off mountain peaks and such. He established his version of Mondstadt by Cider Lake and wanted freedom for his people. As a result, he does not rule directly over his people like the other Archons, for he did not want to become a tyrant himself like his predecessor Decarabian. Thus, he left Mondstadt after establishing it. However, during his absence, more tyrants rose up and the aristocracy became corrupt. Barbatos saw what was happening in his supposedly peaceful Mondstadt and made his return as Venti the Bard. We briefly saw what happened in our previous episodes. He assisted the slave Vanessa with winning her freedom and the freedom of her clan from the corrupt and evil Lawrence clan, and afterwards stayed in Mondstadt a while to see what progress she would make with the now free city. It was after Vanessa established the Knights of Favonius that Venti was pleased with the state of the city and decided to leave again, keeping to his beliefs that he wanted Mondstadt to remain free. As we saw, Barbatos generally didn't intervene with his people's lives. That is, unless their freedom is threatened, which is where Dvalin and Durin come in. Dvalin had already been friends with Barbatos for a while. In fact, they met around 2,000 years prior to when our story as travelers started. Dvalin is an enormous elemental dragon and was quite curious when he was young. One day, he heard beautiful music, and upon investigating, he saw that a bard was playing said music. You guessed it, this was Barbatos. While everyone else was afraid of this large dragon descending on their land, Barbatos was very calm and kept playing. Eventually, he and the dragon became friends. Dvalin also later became one of the 4 Winds, along with Andreas and Vanessa. However, when Durin began his attack on Mondstadt around 500 years ago during the Cataclysm, Barbatos returned to Mondstadt with Dvalin by his side to defeat this black dragon. So, who was Durin? Durin was the creation of an alchemist named Gold, or Rhine-Daughter. He was created in Conria and started attacking Mondstadt. However, Mondstadt at the time was pretty much undefended. The Knights of Favonius were busy with the fighting in Conria, so the people prayed to Barbatos for help. He definitely heard them and swooped in with Dvalin to fight off Durin. They managed to get Durin away from Mondstadt and led him to the snowy mountains of Dragonspine. Dvalin laid a fatal blow to Durin, and Durin fell down to what we know as Wormrest Valley. After this, and after the results of the cataclysm, Barbatos went back to his slumber, unaware that Dvalin had been poisoned by Durin and had fallen into a slumber as well. The next part in this story should be very familiar for us travelers. Dvalin finally woke up, full of poison from Durin, and returned to Mondstadt, though the people were now afraid of him. The Abyss Order used this to their advantage and used Dvalin, now named Storm Terror, for their own purposes. Barbatos also awoke around this time, and with the help of us travelers, was able to cleanse Dvalin of the poison and remove the Abyss Order's influence on him. After this, Venti's Gnosis was taken by the Fatui Harbinger named La Senora, for reasons that are still unknown. And speaking of Gnosis, Venti was actually the one who told us about Gnosis in the first place. A Gnosis is not only an item that proves an Archon is one of the seven, but is also their connection to Celestia. Celestia is basically the abode of the gods. Interestingly enough, all the Gnosis we have seen thus far, Venti's, Zhongli's, and the Raiden Shogun's, are all shaped like chess pieces. Venti's most closely resembles the Queen, which is the most powerful piece in chess. It doesn't really match up with Venti, as he's considered one of the weakest gods. Zhongli's Gnosis resembles a rook, pieces which can be the most powerful towards the end of a game of chess. The Raiden Shogun's Gnosis is the one with the least amount of resemblance to a chess piece, though it could potentially be a bishop or a pawn. While we don't know what the significance is for the Gnosis being shaped like this, I'm sure there is an even bigger story there, one I hope Genshin explores in the future. But Venti's story doesn't end there. While he's generally a free-spirited person, Venti does have some mysteries that surround him. So you know what that means. It's time for Theories of Teyvat. So apparently, Barbatos used to be pretty close to the Cryo Archon, the Tsaritsa. But for an unknown reason, something happened that made her sever ties with him. This was during the Cataclysm 500 years ago, so I can only imagine it has something to do with Conria and what happened there. Maybe that's why his Gnosis was the first one that the Fatui were tasked to grab. The Fatui do what their Archon tells them to do, after all. What are your theories about the Tsaritsa and Barbatos' fallout? And what about the Gnosis? We don't know yet what the significance is of them being shaped like chess pieces. Maybe it means that the Archons are all like chess pieces, being moved about and used by someone for their ulterior purposes. Could it be someone from Celestia doing this? The Tsaritsa herself? Or is there some deeper meaning to it? What do you think? And here we are at the end of this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's topic of Barbatos, Dvalin, and Durin, very important characters in the establishment and development of Mondstadt. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of Venti in coming updates, and I can't wait to find out more about him and his story. Staying with the theme of Mondstadt's history, next episode, we're going to be talking about our favorite Outrider, Amber. I'm so excited for this episode, as I'll have a couple of guests on with me as we discuss everyone's favorite Outrider. Any guesses as to who my guests will be? Tune in to our next episode to find out. Ad Astra Abyssosque, travelers!